out there. This is Noel from Slow Rise Pizza. I see you all flooding in now. Perfect timing, everybody. Welcome. It's Monday office hours. I'm flying solo this evening. Justin, my normal partner in crime, is taking Labor Day off, so we hope Justin's having fun out there. I know that you guys have lots of places you could be, and hopefully you're not making any terrible sacrifices to be here, but I'm glad you're all here. So I'm going to give you guys just a minute or so to get on, and then we'll kind of get things going. Let's see here. I'm just looking back at some notes. The last office hours that we did was August 21st, and we had an excellent turnout. Had some really good questions. So Justin edited the office hours, so you guys can find that on my YouTube page. I'll include a link to that in the chat for those of you who missed it. I thought it was a really good one. It was the first of many that we're doing every other week, and we had some really good questions. So I see that we have some people that are returning. I see Matthew from Philly. He had some really good questions. Dominic doing a sourdough pop-up was awesome. Not sure if Kate's going to be here again from San Pedro. She's got a little, I'd call it a nano bakery. And she's doing subscription sourdough loaves and also working her way through different styles of pizza. So last week we discussed New Haven style. And then we had Frank from New Haven by chance. He was working on a New York Times recipe, so I don't know if Frank is going to be here today, but I invited him to come back and bring his recipe in Baker's Math. And so if Frank comes back and wants to kind of go over that recipe, that one we were discussing, he was saying, so many ounces of this and so many cups of that, and it's really hard to speak about recipes if they're in volume. So yeah. All good. So hello, everybody. It's now 5:02. It's September 4th. Thank you all for coming. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to promote you all to panelist. And so on Zoom, for those of you who don't know, I feel like everybody knows these days, on a webinar, you can be an attendee or you can be a panelist. So if you prefer not to be a panelist, feel free not to accept my invitation. But the idea is that instead of you guys watching me, I like the idea of it being a little more interactive. So instead of raising digital hands, you can raise your real hands. Instead of submitting questions in the Q&A, you can either submit questions in the chat or raise your hands and I'll call on you and we can actually have a conversation, because that's what I really enjoy most about these Zoom classes. I get to talk to you guys, I get to interact. And it's not just one or two questions. If for any of you who were here last week or kind of know what Justin and I usually do on Mondays, the idea is to help you troubleshoot, for instance, recipes with dough. So we were working, let's see, 2 weeks ago with a variety of issues. We were working with Matthew and his mix. And we were going over different ideas with regard to bulk fermentation and the timing. And so I thought that was really interesting. We also talked with Dominic about lots of stuff that he was working on. He's doing a sourdough pop-up, and so we talked about his mix of flour and his hydration and different parts of his process, and how sometimes when you change one or two things in the traditional, let's call it schedule of the mix, not the recipe, but the process, sometimes just one or two things can make a pretty huge difference. So especially with virtual consulting, I like for people to know when they're breaking rules. So we kind of went through his whole routine and kind of identified some yellow flags. So hopefully Dominic has had some good results. Same with Matthew. And then Kate in San Pedro was doing some pretty cool stuff. And so we decided to maybe lower her yeast amount and a few other little things because she was doing a pretty long ferment. So anyway, all good. I'm going to begin by promoting you guys to panelists. If you don't want to be recognized, feel free to change your name or turn off your cameras. But if you don't mind hanging out with me, I'm going to promote you all. So give me a minute and I'm going to promote you each one by one. this is something I usually have Justin do, but now it's my turn to do it. So we're all missing Justin today. He does all kinds of mysterious things in the background when I'm making me look good. So thank you, Justin. Don, welcome back. Ezra, looking forward to seeing your face. Ezra used to work with me back in the day. Let's see. Hello, Lisa. There we go. All right. Mr. Hincliffe, welcome. There we go. There's Lauren. Let's see. Dominic, there you are. Welcome back, my friend. Dennis, there you are. Beautiful. All right, so I've got some panelists, and it looks like I've got some people who want to remain anonymous, which is perfectly fine. It looks like there's a bunch of people who are on iPhone as well. So welcome, everybody. For those of you who missed it, also last week we did our first Science of Sourdough Zoom. That was really good. We had Cameron Martino from Levin Foods, and we had John Porter from Smog City Brewing. So for those of you who were here for that, I thought it was really good. And so as most of you or some of you probably know by now, we're going to be alternating. So every other week, we're going to do either a Zoom office hours like we're doing today. And then as we did last week and we'll be doing next week, we're going to do a Science of Sourdough webinar. So last week we had John as our featured guest and Cameron Martino doing some little bit of sourdough work with us. And next week we're going to have Cameron be our featured guest, and he's going to do a super deep dive into the science of sourdough. So I'm excited for that. And then 2 weeks after next week, we're going to have a super special guest who is now confirmed. So for those of you who are familiar with modernist cuisine, modernist bread, modernist pizza, and I believe the forthcoming that will be modernist pastry, if that's the correct title. We're going to have the publisher Stephanie Swan come on, and she's going to do an awesome history of sourdough. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. So all right, looks like we've gotten lots of people on. Welcome everybody. Nice to see you all. So let's see here. I'm wondering out loud if anybody is feeling like they want to hit me up with any questions. You want to wave at me or raise your hand. Stephen Hincliffe, how are you, sir? Are you there? I'm going to ask you to unmute. And if you like, I will spotlight you as well. Let's see if we can hear you. Stephen.
There you go.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Good.
Tell me what's going on.
So I made some dough this weekend and it didn't come out perfectly. As usual, people liked the way that it tasted. No complaints, but the dough tore very easily.
Okay, so hold on. So torn dough. Now, you and I have worked together on multiple occasions. You've attended some classes. I catered a party at your house. You helped me out at Pizza City Fest. Thank you again for that. So that was a big assist. So do me a favor. I want to get to the issue at hand, but I also want you to kind of explain your recipe, your process, the oven you use, the kind of pizza you're trying to make. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us 60 seconds on, what it is that you're trying to make, that'll be really helpful. I consider you somewhere between an intermediate and advanced home pizza maker who possibly is aspiring to open a pizzeria one day. True or not true? True. Excellent. True. All right. Yep. So take us through it. Tell us about your recipe. Tell us about your process. Tell us about your oven. Tell us about some of your ingredients, and then we'll try to retrace your steps and see if we can help. All right.
Okay. So I'm trying to make a California pizza that is, I guess, Neapolitan-ish, but that's probably not the right word. I am using flour from Central Milling and Cairn Springs. It was an equal combination of Central Milling Double O organic and Cairn Spring espresso flour, which I know you're not a big fan of the double O.
Hey, come on.
Okay. But I've had great results with that combination before. So I went back to that as I've been experimenting using more freshly milled flours that I've ground myself, and maybe 100% of the Glacier Peak before, with mixed results. So I wanted a good result, so I went back to an old recipe. There were some variables that I'll talk about later, but that was my flour. I used 68% hydration. I used sourdough starter, 250 grams of that.
And as a percentage of the flour weight, what does that come out to? That 250 grams.
I haven't figured out how to do that, Noel.
Okay, we'll work on that.
And 2.5% salt. I'm using a wood oven, big Forno Piombo wood oven that I had at about 750 degrees. I temped everything. I used a improved mix that we've worked on together. About a minute of the first mix, and then a 20-minute Autolyse. Then I added my salt, and I did another minute at speed 1, and then 2 minutes at speed 2, and 2 minutes at speed 3. I did 2 stretch and folds, one at 30 minutes and one at 60 minutes. And then I left it out longer than I usually do, because typically I don't get much of a rise on my pizza on my dough at that point. So I left it till at least doubled in size, which was 6 hours after I finished my mix.
Wow.
So that's the variable that changed, that maybe that led to my issues. Another variable that might have led to my issues was the espresso flour I used is a type 85 flour. And another variable that changed is somehow my final dough temperature ended up at 85 degrees.
Oh boy.
Even though it was 75 degrees before I started. So that's a 10 degree friction factor, which is super unusual for me. I usually have like maybe a 3 or 4 degree friction factor. So
well, hold on here. That's a big one. So friction factor is 3 to 4 degrees and went up to about 10.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and what was the room temperature? Do we know?
Room temp was 69 degrees.
Perfect. Okay. Wow. Okay. Anything else? Any other details?
No, like I said, I think, the variables, because the recipe I've used before, except that the espresso flour was different than either the Trailblazer or the Glacier Peak that I've used, but Trailblazer's a type 85 too, so I don't know if that should have really created an issue. The other factor that changed, like I said, was the final dough temperature was very warm, and the bulk ferment was longer than normal. But two things that I thought were super positive about this recipe that I thought I would see as an improvement was, one, my starter was much more active when I used it. Sometimes I think maybe I let it go for 7 hours or so, and it's already started to shrink. Whereas this, I think, was still kind of rising or peaked when I used it. So I was excited about that. And then the doubling of the bulk fermentation, I thought was going to be a positive thing. But I was disappointed, not necessarily in the taste of the dough or how it cooked, but it tore really easily. So I was doing a lot of patching.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, well, here's the good news. The good news is that I feel like I can help because you've taken such good care to kind of trace your steps. So that's super duper helpful. All right. So, and I also feel like you've done a lot of the work yourself, because I think your active starter, your dough doubling in bulk, which is unusual. And also your higher than usual friction factor and final dough temperature. So these are all yellow flags, right? So let's see if we can connect the dots. I'm not sure that we can, but let's think about a few things. All right. So Let's see here. So the room temperature you're saying was you're on the ocean, so 69 degrees is probably pretty normal, right?
Correct. It was a nice day.
Is there any reason to think that your flour temperature was warmer than usual?
My flour temperature was 75 degrees.
All right, so warmer than your room temperature. So that means to me that maybe it had been warm the day before.
Or my flour was stored in the basement, which is supposed to be a cool, dry, dark place, but
Yeah.
it's pretty warm in there right now with the temperatures we've been having. So
Yeah. All right. And then what do you know what the temperature of your water was?
82 degrees.
Ooh, pretty warm. All right.
Which I had been doing that to get so 75 degrees was the average of those three things. I put the starter in the water before I temped it. So it was those three temps divided by three, and it came out to 75, which 79 degrees final dough temperature, I think I would have been okay with. And so usually I
Yeah.
have to warm up my water a little bit to hit that number.
Understood. All right, so it sounds like you did everything right, okay? And so let's see about a few things. Now, one of the things that I was making a note about was that when you were going over your formula and your process, you seem to have everything dialed in. The only thing I'm wondering about is your sourdough, right? And you said you were using 250 grams of sourdough. So do we know the total weight of your flour, the central milling and the cairn spring? What's the total weight of those two?
The flour, 900 grams.
Okay. That's the total weight, huh?
Yep.
Okay. So let me just do some quick math. So if we say 250 divided by 900, so you're coming in at about 27 or 28% sourdough starter. All right. So I'm going to add one more yellow flag to the mix. I would say that for bread, that's pretty darn healthy. But for pizza, what's the total length of your fermentation?
6 hours. Well, and then I put it in the fridge for 2 days.
Yeah. So it's a perfect storm, Steve. Let's go over it. So here's what I would say. Let's talk about norms. Let's talk about tradition. When it comes to sourdough, what I would say is that if you're doing let's say an overnight fermentation, let's say for a pan pizza, you can be as high as 27 or 28% sourdough. If you're doing a bread recipe, you can definitely be, 27 to even 40% sourdough. But if you're doing a long, cold fermentation and you're doing a 6-hour bulk, which is pretty long, if for some reason your dough comes out too warm, right, and your starter is more active than usual for whatever reason, here's what I always say. If one thing in your process changes, it's not the end of the world, right? You can usually account for it. But two or more is a yellow flag. And so just from what we can tell, you've got a 2-alarm fire going on before you even know, right? And so what I would say is that if your starter hadn't doubled, sorry, if your dough hadn't doubled in size during bulk, that wouldn't really be a red flag, because basically doubling in size is something we do for bread, but not really pizza, right? And honestly, not that many bread recipes double in size anymore, right? It really depends on a lot of things. It's a little bit, I'm going to say old fashioned, because a lot of people used to let their bread dough double in size and then quote unquote punch it down. But these days, if you're really controlling your fermentation, I would say for bread, doubling in size is a lot, and for pizza, you might be going overboard.
Okay.
So I don't know why your starter was more active. I really don't. And that might just be a mystery. I actually think it's a good thing when your starter is super active. So if I were gonna say, all right, Steve, let's do this again and make a few tweaks, here's what I would suggest. Number one, I would say just a general traditional norm for pizza, I would say that you want to be in the range of 5 to about 15%. I know people that go 20%, but that would be more for winter months. number one. All right. So for me, 5 to 15, even 5 to 10 is perfect for the summer. Right. Now, every environment is different. You're right on the ocean, right? And so I would say that you don't have like the perfect environment for sourdough. It's not a bad environment, right? But there's a lot of salt in the air, and it's not like a forest, right? Where you've got a lot of fauna. If anything, you've got like ocean chaparral, right?
Mhm.
Right? Which is beautiful, but it's not really an active place. So for whatever reason, your dough was really active, right? It might have been the warm flour that could have done it. Also, I got to say that flour is alive, and yes, sometimes I cast aspersions about certain kinds of flour, right? But I'm a big fan of central milling, and I'm a big fan of Cairn Springs, and so those flours are fresh and they have awesome ingredients, and they're really, they make everything more active. So with a 75 or an 80-degree flour, and a generally warm environment and a ton of starter by traditional norms, you have your 2 alarm fires on the verge of going to a 3 alarm fire. So in the future, here's some of the things I would suggest. I would say slightly cooler water, right? The fact that your friction factor went up from 3 or 4 degrees to 9 or 10, really, I don't understand. And I don't know if you do either. So you're going to have to, what I would actually try to do before I change anything is try to recreate the exact same situation again, right? And take that situation, and if it's not a hotter day, instead of going 6 hours and letting your dough double, go 2 hours, go 2.5 or 3 hours at the most, right?
Okay.
Um, I love that you were doing lots of stretch and folds. I like that you had a nice wet dough. 2.5% salt is right where you want to be. Um, let's see here. No, I mean, as for why your dough was breaking, right, or tearing, I would say that it was pretty obviously over fermented, right?
Mhm.
Was it stretching easier than usual?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, what about the coloring? Was it browning the way that it normally does? Was it rising the way that it normally does? Did it eat or taste any differently than it normally does?
Uh, it might have burnt easier than it normally does. There
Hmm.
was burning instead of leoparding really in some spots, which could have been too much in the oven, but it was a little unusual. Other than that, I thought it looked pretty normal. Like when I started stretching it, I was pretty psyched because I thought it was going to be a perfect dough. And so I was typically with my dough, I'm able to be not rough, but I do some, I work on my Neapolitan slap and tossing it in the air, and it immediately, failed. So,
Understood. Let's not call it a fail. Let's not call it a fail. What I think happened was that you were using a winter recipe in the summer, right? We've been having some pretty extreme heat all over the country, all over the world. So whatever was going on in your basement, you know, who knows? I don't know how long that flour had been there. Maybe it had been even warmer than it was. So it was super active no matter what was going on, right?
yeah, yeah,
I wouldn't call it a fail. I would call it an opportunity to see if you can lower your starter amount,
yeah,
right? And shorten your bulk,
yeah,
right? Maybe decrease your dough temperature by 3 or 4 degrees. But again, what I would do before I make any changes is let's see if we can do it again, since I think your dough. I love an active dough with lots of starter. I love like pushing my dough to 85 degrees when it comes out of the mixer if I'm using sourdough, not commercial yeast, right? Especially if the room temperature is cool, right? Because over the course of 6 hours, your dough is actually going to like kind of redline and then come back down into a beautiful range. So I think you're good. I think it was just the amount that 6 hours was probably pretty brutal. And for whatever reason, the active starter, put kerosene in your fire. So I would love to find out why your sourdough starter was so active and just reduce the amount.
yeah.
And then let's see if we can in the future see if there's a better summer amount, maybe closer to 10% than 27 or 28.
Okay. Quick follow-up question is, so the coming up with that percentage on the starter to the flour, I've been working on using the hydration in the starter to adjust my percentages, right? So But in this case, it is the right way to get that percentage is the starter divided by the flour.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
No, thank you. The way that you keep such great notes is very, very helpful for me.
Yeah.
All right. So hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks and we'll get an update.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Anybody else want to jump in? Anybody else want to jump in? Why don't you unmute and let me know who you are, and I will we'll start the conversation.
I had my hand raised.
Dominic, how are you? For some reason, I'm not seeing the raised hands, but let me
It's all good.
don't go anywhere. I'm going to spotlight you. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
Good. I mean, today I had a real sourdough emergency. My wife accidentally baked my starter, and I'm working through that. But just to follow up from the last time, I mean, all the stuff that you had me do really improved the texture of the dough and the workability. So I feel like I got that to a place where I was really happy. And then this happened today in prepping for an event on Thursday where I'm going to debut Detroit style pizza.
Wow.
But now I have no starter, so I don't know what I'm going to do. I actually reached out to Dan at Raza, and he might give me some. So hopefully that exchange goes well.
All right.
And,
Well, hold on. Let's talk about that, because maybe what you're going to want to do is, I think everybody should have an emergency dough recipe just in case these kinds of things ever happen.
Yeah.
Right. So let's do this, if you don't mind. You got a few minutes for me?
Yeah.
All right, good. So let's do this. Would you mind reviewing some of the issues that we went over last week for everybody, and let people know what you did or what we agreed upon that would help you solve some of your issues? And then we'll continue on with the issues at hand this week and see if we can make some improvements to your format or your system, so that we have a backup dough recipe in case this happens again.
Yeah. So the last time that we spoke, I do a sourdough recipe. I'm at about 15% starter. The hydration comes in at about 67% for the New York hybrid style that I do. I use a mixture of King Arthur, the Sir Galahad, and the Sir Lancelot. And my questions were around just getting a better texture out of the dough. So it was pretty inconsistent. Sometimes it felt a little weak. And that was mainly due to my assumption that now that I had a spiral mixer, I no longer had to do stretch and folds. So your recommendations were to go back and reverse the order that I was adding the salt and the oil. So the oil is now the last thing that I add in the mixing process. I was mixing to about 83 degrees. Now I'm stopping around like 75 degrees, and I'm getting there in about, I would say, like 6 to 8 minutes, which has greatly decreased the amount of time that I was mixing my dough, and it's been a lot more efficient. So, the few tricks that you had given me were a big help.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see here. Let's talk about a backup for your dough. All right.
Yeah.
So, where are you again?
I'm in New Jersey.
And so Dan from Rotsa, he's in Jersey City, right? How far is he from you?
It's like within an hour, so probably like 45 minutes.
All right. Now, when do you want to mix this dough?
I was hoping to do it today to get ahead. So I haven't done a Detroit style dough in this quantity before. So what I was hoping to do is I was going to mix the dough tonight. I was going to let it go for 24 hours. I was going to prepare all the pans, ball it up tomorrow night, let it sit in the fridge overnight, and then I was going to stretch it out and then bake it on Wednesday. And then this way everything was ready to go for Thursday. So that schedule obviously now is a little bit altered. And if I can get, an active starter tomorrow, I think I should still be able to accomplish the goal. But,
Right.
there's a lot of variables there, right? Like that's not my starter. It's not what I've worked with before. So who knows how that's going to come out. But my biggest thing right now is that I do sourdough, and to not debut a new pizza with a sourdough recipe kind of feels a little, a little cheap to me. So I had previously dried my starter, and I tried to get that going. I doubt I have enough time for that. I imagine that'll take a couple of days, not quite as long as starting a starter from scratch, but yeah, I don't know. And then if none of that pans out, then I have to do an emergency dough. So
Well, okay, but here's the thing. Here's what I would say. All right, yeah, we all want the dough of our dreams every day, right? But let me take you back to an experiment that we did in baking school. And in baking school, I went to French Culinary Institute, and there was a 2-month artisan bread program, and we did 2 weeks of French, 2 weeks of Italian, 2 weeks of German, and 2 weeks of pastry, right? And so the first 2 weeks was all French, and it was baguettes, and we did a lot of pre-ferments, right? And so from the get-go, we were doing 5 different kinds of baguettes, right? We were doing a straight overnight baguette, right, with no pre-ferment. We were doing a pouliche baguette. We were doing a pâte fermentée baguette. We were doing a sourdough baguette, right? So there's 4. And then we were doing sometimes baguettes where we did a combination, right? And so here's something that would be interesting. I know you don't have the time for it, but have you ever used other pre-ferments like bigas or pouliche? All right.
yeah,
Have you ever used a pâte fermentée, which is an old dough? All right. Are you comfortable using a pouliche?
it's been a while,
Okay.
but I think I've read enough to where I've done it successfully in the past. I don't see why I couldn't do it again.
All right. So some of the things that I would think about, all right, let's think about pre-ferments. So what I would say is, and the reason I brought up baking school was I remember at the end of the French 2 weeks, we did an experiment, and we did 5 different kinds of baguettes. We did a straight dough same day, a straight dough overnight, a pouliche, a biga, a pâte fermentée. Sorry, I think we didn't do a biga, and we did a sourdough, right? And the sourdough was right around maybe 15% same day. And here's the funny thing: we all thought that we'd be able to pick out the sourdough, right? But if you do a sourdough right, it's not going to be more sour. What sourdough brings to the mix is a complexity of flavor, right? You're going to have better shelf life. You're going to have, I think, better crumb structure, right? You should have, I was looking for a better crust, and that would be it with baguette making a little more eggshell, right? Not so crunchy, not so soft, like that beautiful combination, right? So here's what I would say. I'll bet you that you could make a pouliche version or even a straight dough version, but a nice long fermentation, right, with your pizza. And I don't think anybody but you would notice.
You're probably right.
So here's what you really are looking for, right? You want to make sure that if you're going to do like a straight dough version of yours, that you're going to nail your DDT, right? You want to make sure that you're going to have the right amount of yeast. So do you have access to either fresh yeast, active dry, or instant dry yeast?
Definitely the instant active dry yeast. I could
Okay.
probably fresh yeast.
Okay. Fresh yeast you don't need. If you have instant dry, I would go with that, right?
Okay.
So a couple things to think about. Number one, there is not, I mean, there is, but there isn't really a straight ratio for sourdough to instant dry that you can hang your hat on, that you can depend on 100%. Some people would say if you're going to use 15% starter, that's the equivalent of 0.15% instant dry yeast, right? So for 100 grams of flour, it would be 1.5 grams of instant dry yeast or 15 grams of starter. That would be a good starting point, right?
Okay.
Now, another thing is that, remind me, what kind of pizza are you usually doing when you're not doing a Detroit?
So it's kind of like a hybrid between New York and like a Neapolitan.
Okay, so it's a hearth style pizza, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's see. One of the things that I would say is that generally for me, a pan pizza, almost no matter what style, usually requires a little more starter or a little more yeast than a hearth style pizza. Pan pizza more than hearth style. So you might want to dial your starter up to maybe 20% from 15.
Okay.
I could even imagine you doing 25% starter, right? But 20 is in range. Really depends on how warm it is, right? Also, do you know what temperature? I think if I remember correctly, when you were retarding your dough, you had a pretty cool temperature under 40 degrees, right?
Yeah, so my fridges are set to like 38.
Yep.
So they fluctuate though. Like there's some cold spots towards the back, like they're not perfect. So
Okay. Okay. When were you planning on doing the mix? You said today, so it's 5:30 in LA. You're on the East Coast, right?
today's shot, yeah, it's 8:30. So
Great. Well, so here's what I would say. If I were you, I would do an overnight pouliche that I would mix tonight.
yep.
And my favorite for a pan pizza is something in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% pouliche.
Okay.
And like when I say my favorite, one of my favorite pizza makers is Lee Hunsinger. He's based in Texas, and I've worked with him. We've done some classes together. Last time I was in Texas consulting, he came and worked with me, and he does some really nice. Pan pizzas. He does a Sicilian. He does a really nice Detroit. Let me look him up on Instagram, and I'll put his link in the chat. If anybody knows, he's like Pizza Lee something. But I think you should look at some of his pizzas and see if you think they look good to you. Pizza Lee, I think it's like Pizza Lee 333 or something. Anybody out there? Pizza Lee 33, Lee Hunsinger. I'll put it in the chat for you guys. There you go, Pizza Lee 33. So for me, he's somebody that I know uses something in the range of about 30%. And so I would say 20 to 30% is kind of where you want to be, putting that in the chat right now. Also, he studied with somebody named Brian Spangler. And Brian Spangler is a pretty well-known pizza maker, and so he helped Lee with some of his original recipes. And so, if Brian says pouliche at 20 to 30%, I think you're in the right ballpark. So for me, Brian Spangler and Lee Hunsinger are two of the best pizza makers I know in the United States, and they rely not on sourdough, but on pouliche. So I think if you're in the 20 to 30% range, and also with a pouliche, you can do a 4-hour pouliche, you can do a 12-hour, you can do a 16-hour. But if you think you can mix a pouliche tonight for your dough tomorrow, I think you'll be in pretty good shape.
Okay. Would you ferment that, or I mean, it's got to rise on its own, right?
So I would say that I wouldn't cold ferment my pouliche, but I would try to find the coolest place to let it rise. So I like something in the neighborhood of 55 or 60 degrees overnight. Do you have anything that's cool? That is cool?
I have a wine fridge.
Perfect.
But if not, I mean, I keep my house pretty cool. So
good.
It's like around 68. And in my basement, it's probably a little cooler. So I should be okay, I think.
Yeah. And so the thing with a pouliche, you want to watch it rise, right? And you want to catch it when it domes, right? So I would mix it tonight and get up nice and early tomorrow and keep an eye on it. Get your dough meased out so that if you see it's rising and you start to see some of those crevices before it kind of falls, that's where you want to catch it, and you won't get any off flavors or aromas. And again, I would be surprised if anybody but you would notice. And so something I used to do when I was doing catering is I would show up with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different doughs, because you never know, right?
Yeah. So for the pouliche, I assume 1-to-1, right? Flour to water, and then
1-to-1.
And then for the amount, I mean, I need about 1,600 grams, or no, the 1,600 grams would be 15%. So I have to scale that up a little bit for the amount that I'm looking to make. And then I would just figure out that the instant dry usage would be 0.15% of the flour weight for the pouliche, right?
You know what? It really depends on the temperature. So let's do this. When we get off, why don't you send me an email?
Okay.
I'm Noel at Slow Rise Pizza, and tell me what you're thinking about, and I'll look at your formula and email you back.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then I had 2 quick questions and follow up. So one of the things that I've been playing around with is freezing dough. So there are instances where someone will call me and then they'll ask if I can come out tomorrow, and I just don't have dough ready. So I've experimented with freezing dough, and every time I try to see how it bakes, I usually overproof it because The only time I get to use my oven is at events. And then I get so busy at the events that I forget that it's there and it sits out for way too long. And then when I go to use it, it's just it's overshot at that point. Is there like a best practice for that?
When to freeze your dough, you mean?
Yeah, so I freeze it after I ball it, like I would normally do. Like I ball it and then put it back in the fridge and let that go overnight. And then I would take it out and then let it kind of come up to temp. And it does what it's supposed to do. I just haven't timed it right. So I just want to make sure that I'm doing that correctly if I'm in a dire situation.
Yeah, so here's what I would say. It sounds like you're balling it and freezing it at the right time. The thing that's tricky, right, is bringing it out of a deep
Yeah.
freeze and getting it to temp. And so depending on the size of your dough ball, depending on how cold your freezer is, depending on how cold your refrigerator is, I have clients that sometimes let it thaw, and by thaw I mean go from frozen to refrigerated for up to 48 hours. I have
Yep.
one client that's using frozen dough on a mass scale, about 800 dough balls a day, and right now we're in the 72 to 96 hour range because they don't want it to just thaw. They want the fermentation to be perfect as well.
Yep.
So we're actually using for that particular recipe less than 0.1 IDY, which is less than 10% starter, right? So you sound like you're a little higher. So I don't think that you would need to go 72 to 48 hours, but probably, sorry, 72 to 96 hours. But I would say something in the 48-hour range will probably be a good start.
Yeah, because what I've done is I've taken it out of the freezer the night before, and then I put it into the fridge. And then when I take it out that day, usually by the time like I set up and I do everything, it's probably still cold. But then like once it gets to a certain point, it kind of rapidly warms up, and then it's rising. And then before I know it, 6, 7 hours have passed, and it's like it's just blown out. So
Yeah. The other thing is, how long do you usually freeze it for before you use it?
I mean, I haven't really. I've never used it, so I think I froze this batch like a week ago.
Yeah. So the reason I ask is that here's what I would say. Like one of my clients does something similar to what you do. The context is this: they always have a batch of dough that's been frozen for less than a week, just in case they get into trouble,
Yep.
right? And so, generally speaking, you're not going to find a huge difference in the way your dough performs if it's been frozen for, let's say, less than a week. But the closer you get to maybe 2 or 3 weeks or even a month, you're going to start to see some differences.
Mhm.
So, one thing that you're doing right is I would say that using a pre-ferment is really important because if you're using a straight dough, you're not going to have the same kind of shelf life. Number one. One of the problems that I sometimes have is with extensibility, especially on not just on a pan pizza, but on any kind of pizza. And I feel like the glutens tighten up. So you're in the high 60s or low 70s with your hydration, right?
Yeah. So for the hybrid style, I'm at about 67%, and then the Detroit, I do about 78.
78. Wow, that's nice and high. Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like you'll be great with that.
Cool.
One thing I would say is if you're going to events and you don't know if or when you're going to use that dough, maybe you bring that fermentation down, the hydration down from 78 to just a few degrees lower. So if your dough gets too warm or sits out for too long, it doesn't turn to matzo ball soup. It's
Yep.
something that you can use.
Cool. And then for Detroit's, like when you're doing 50 and you have to stretch them all out, is there any like time saver there? Like, do you let the dough ball kind of like relax and everything, or then do you just kind of like ball it and then start stretching it out?
Well, so I mean, I usually ball my dough. Is that your wife?
Yeah,
I see her. Mine's
yeah,
sneaking around somewhere too.
yeah.
Let's see. I think honestly, I don't know if there's really a go-to for Detroit. I feel like I have heard so many different ways that people do Detroit. I think the most important thing for Detroit style pizza is people find whatever works for their schedule, and then that's what they do. It's not. I don't find that there's as many. Uh, People like with the Neapolitan tradition where this is the rule, don't break it. What's more important is that you get the flavor, you get the rise, you get the shape, you get the caramelization, you get the crispy bottom, you get the square or the rounded corners, whatever you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
So I wish I could say that there was a go-to way, but I've heard dozens of ways that people do it. And the most important thing is, how does it eat?
Yeah. I mean, everything comes out fine. I'm just trying to not fight the dough for like 2.5, 3 hours
Yeah,
to get it stretched out in the pans.
I
So,
get it.
like,
I get it.
like it's okay when you're making like, 4 or 5 of them, but when you have 50 trays out there to like stretch all of that dough into the corners, it's process.
Well,
So,
one thing that you're doing is tricky, and it could bite you in the butt, or it could be something that makes your pizza great, is you're catering on site. Tell me if I'm wrong, and
yep.
you're not doing par bakes.
No.
Yeah. So that's tough. And I'm not saying
So
you should do.
for the
Go ahead.
Detroit style pizzas, I was gonna par bake those
Yeah.
either the night before or the morning of, depending
Yeah.
on what time the event is.
Yeah.
Because I don't see how I could realistically, bring all of those, bake them on site, and then top them and have them like it. It would take too long.
Just checking. Just
Yeah.
checking. All right. So I think we're on the same page.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. I'm sorry to hear about your starter, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah,
So
I said the same thing earlier.
Yep. You know what? Another thing that we didn't discuss. I don't think I see any hand raised. So let me just bring up another topic that I think is cool. I think that there maybe is the opportunity. So let's say Dan comes through, Dan from Rotsa, with some starter for you. Have you ever done a hybrid? So let's say you wanted to do 20% starter. What if you did 10% starter and 0.1 IDY? So you had a combination of commercially leavened dough and naturally leavened dough. Is that something you'd ever consider?
Yeah, I've actually done that in the past. So I was adding like 10% starter, and then I would use like a little tiny shot of the instant dry yeast, like less than half a gram.
Less than half a gram.
Yeah, and that worked well too. So
yeah. So yeah, the thing with other people's starters is that I've used them before, and sometimes I've gotten lucky, but most of the time, other people's starters are on other people's schedules. So it's a little bit of a Hail Mary. I mean, Dan's a great guy, and I'm sure his starter is beautiful. I've done lots of classes with him. I've eaten at his pizzeria. He's a master. So nothing against him, but you have your own schedule, and your starter has its own schedule. So I would plan for the worst and hope for the best.
That's where I'm at. So
good. All right, so send me an email and I'll follow up with some traditional Polish recipes and give you some yeast amounts and some temperatures.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Do I see any other raised hands? There we go. Don, how are you, sir? Come on down whenever you're ready.
Here we go. How you doing, Noel?
Don, give me 1 second and I'm going to see if I can spotlight you for some reason. There we go. I'm going to spotlight you for everybody. Hello, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Can you tell people who you are and what your not what your resume is, but what you've been doing for the last few decades, so people know who we're talking to?
Long time shopping in Los Angeles. About in 2014, opened an Italian restaurant with a wood burning pizza oven, and after 40 years or so of being a chef, I had never done pizza professionally, so we decided to take it on, having a Kunto oven from Naples. And at that point, I didn't know of any Noel, so I would stay up late at night, YouTube videos, trying to get some information out of people, which was extremely difficult. Nobody's giving you really the recipe or their flour or any of that. So it was a lot of trial and error. But we got it to a really good place eventually. And, in a restaurant environment, it's not a pizzeria, it's a full menu Italian restaurant, pasta program, etc. So to get that consistency day in, day out, to try to be kind of anal about the process, for lack of a better term, took a few classes with you, and light bulb really started going on. And we embedded that process into our workflow and it goes really well most of the time. Once in a while, you get a blip on the radar screen, but overall, very good. My question is finding the balance between extensibility and elasticity. I find that trying to achieve a little more extensibility, I'm not sure what technique or combination of techniques to achieve that. Is it Autolyse? Is it less mixing in the mixer, higher hydration, all of the above? What can I do to manipulate to get a little more of an edge that way?
Good. Excellent question. All right. So the good news is that you have a lot of possibilities to achieve more extensibility, right? And I think you've already hit upon a few of them. So hydration, meaning water, that's an easy one, right? So by adding more water to your mix, it allows the dough to stretch more easily, right? And that's a good thing. Often it gives you a more open crumb. Sometimes it gives you a sweeter aroma, right? Sometimes more floral. There's a lot of things that are good, but also it could make your dough more sticky. So you want to be careful, right? Sometimes if you add a little bit of water to the mix, you might want to either mix it for a little longer or do a longer autolyse, right? Or possibly even do an extra stretch and fold, right? So you got to be careful. So you also brought up the autolyse. So the idea with an autolyse is that you can let time do the work and mix less. But just because you autolyse for 40 minutes instead of 20 doesn't mean you're going to get a more extensible dough. The idea behind extending the autolyse is you can mix less, right? So it's a delicate combination. I've done, the next question we're going to do has to do with an extended autolyse that somebody asked in the chat. And so I've done as long as an overnight autolyse. I've done 4 to 6 hours of autolyse in service, right, in a professional setting. And so these can be wonderful things to do. Less mixing time is another thing. Another thing that I like to do is I like to use multiple kinds of flour, right? So let's see, we were talking with Dominic before, and I think he uses the two kinds of flour in his mix. He uses a high protein Sir Lancelot flour, and he uses a lower protein Sir Galahad flour, both from King Arthur. And so if you're using multiple kinds of flour in your mix, maybe a lower protein addition will give you more extensibility, right? Something that I like to do is I like to use as little yeast as possible, and usually time will give you more extensibility, right? So let's say, for instance, you are having a party at your house or you're doing service in your restaurant, and let's say service starts at 5 o'clock, and you know that your dough likes to be out for 4 hours. Well, what if you let it sit out for 4.5 or 5 hours and find a nice cool place? That should promote extensibility as well.
Yeah, very good. I think, we mixed pretty much straight Neapolitan Caputo Blue, just under 63% hydration. I think it would be pretty tough to raise the hydration.
Yeah.
It seems like it would just be too sticky. But then I started experimenting, trying to make a different kind of pizza out of a Pizza Master oven. I don't want to call it New York, but higher protein flours, and I was just trying to achieve what I thought would be a better kind of pizza for delivery and takeout, because Neapolitan is not really good for that, I feel. So started playing with Sir Lancelot and Caputo Americana, Tony G flours, definitely 66, 67% hydration. And I started getting some good extensibility, but it wasn't consistent, and plus I didn't have access to the oven 7 days a week, so it's kind of herky-jerky the way it went. But once I saw that better extensibility, I thought it was a really good thing, just in terms of production in a restaurant, just faster to get it open, and got really good results I felt in the final product.
Excellent. Let me ask you this: in terms of your fermentation schedule, when do you ball the dough and when do you bake the pizzas?
We we um, we mix the dough. We bench rest, depending on the temperature, for 2 hours plus. Do 2 or 3 stretch and folds. Bulk ferment overnight. Take it out, ball it, back in the fridge, and we use it the next day. So
All right.
pretty much 48 hours.
All right. So a couple of things on that. I would say that traditional Neapolitan, which is super extensible, I mean super traditional Neapolitan, I don't believe they even do a bulk fermentation. It comes out of the mixer. They mix to full gluten development, but usually very slowly, right? They could use a fork mixer. They could use a diving arm mixer. There's a lot of very gentle mixers that they use. And oftentimes it's not just the style of mixer, it's the speed at which the mixers mix. So a lot of those Italian fork mixers, compared with like a Hobart American style, they're mixing at 30 or 40 RPMs and they never get to second speed, number one. Number two, overnight bulk adds a lot of strength to your dough. So something in between no bulk fermentation at all and overnight bulk, I think you should look at maybe a 1 or 2 hour bulk, and maybe no stretch and folds or just one, right, would give you a very beautiful extensibility as well. Here's something I noticed. I've balled dough all over the world with lots of different people. Some people are very gentle and some people are very muscular, very forceful, very rough with their dough. So maybe a more gentle approach combined with less bulk fermentation, fewer stretch and folds, maybe a teeny bit more hydration, it will get you where you want to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you, Noel.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate your support.
Yeah, great.
Good. Excellent. All right. Removing spotlight. So Daniel Rodriguez, are you there? Are you there, sir? Where are you? Daniel was hitting me up in the chat. Hello, sir. Are you there? Dan.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I hear you. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. It's nice and dark where you are. Hold on. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can spotlight you. Your spotlight. I can hear you. I just can't see you, but I know you're there. I see the reflection of your glasses.
Okay. Yeah.
Before we get started, tell us where you are and who you are, and a little bit about your pizza making background, please, and then we'll get to your Autolyse question.
My name's Daniel. I'm in Massachusetts. I have a pizzeria where we're making like a New York style pizza. I've made Neapolitan pizza too in the past, but right now I'm just doing takeout.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right, so let's talk. Tell us about your Autolyse question and what makes you ask about Autolyse.
I guess like I'm in search of, well, for me personally, I'm trying to get like a little bit more structure, like after like a couple days where I feel like it's funny because going back to what they were asking before, like I don't really have like a problem with extensibility. Mine is keeping that structure for a couple days. And so I was wondering if like an overnight Autolyse of like the dough would like give it some more strength to kind of hold up for a couple days. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. So let's see. So do you have an issue where sometimes your dough sitting in the walk-in already balled in the box will kind of flatten out a little bit?
Correct.
And you're trying to prevent that from happening?
Yes.
So besides the dough balls flattening out, do they spring less in the oven? Do you get less crumb structure? What else happens besides the look of the dough ball?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I mean, it's not like I mean, I have great days too, don't get me wrong, but then there's the days where there's like the days where it'll just like not spring as much in the oven. It'll be like too thin, It'll be like sometimes it's like that perfect like crumb structure all the way down to the middle to the tip. And then other times it's like, it's pretty damn thin in the middle. And I don't hate it, but it's not perfect, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Where are you at with the yeast right now? What percentage? You're down around
Um,
0.1% instant dry.
yeah.
Yeah. Have you thought about going lower than that?
No, I haven't. You know, not, no.
All right. So let's see here. I mean, a longer auto lease. I love a long auto lease. How long are you doing right now?
I'm just doing like 20, 30 minutes.
All
Like
right.
20 minutes. Let's say 20 minutes.
All right. So I would say 20 minutes is about the minimum. I wouldn't go. Your question in the chat was, I think, asking about an overnight auto lease, right?
Yeah.
So I've done that before where I was mixing with whole wheat, 100% whole wheat. And I
Mhm.
feel like sometimes, and I'm not sure if this is right, but some of the wheat that I've used before, I feel like the whole wheat, the bran and the germ, if you don't soften it up somehow, I feel like it's slicing the glutens and I feel like it's depleting the glutens. And I don't get the same structure that I get with either a type 85 or a type 70 or a type 65. So I've used the overnight auto lease before to kind of soften up the bran and the germ, and I felt like it's worked really well. But for you, what I would say is I wouldn't go from 20 minutes to overnight. I would go from how many batches of dough do you usually mix in a day?
2.
Two. So here's what I would think about. I would think about doing a 1 to 2 hour auto lease. And I would also think about doing a 2 to 4 hour auto lease and starting there and see if you could get a little less. You would have to adjust for it with mixing a little bit less and see if you get a better result,
Okay.
right? Remind me also when your dad does the shaping of the dough balls in your pizzeria, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Is he doing a pre-shape?
No, right now we're not. But we're doing a pretty long bench rest, which is like really helping out.
A long bench rest is good, but I think that to give you a little more structure, I would also try a pre-shape, right? So you divide it. You how many dough balls you do at a time
Um, like
in a
like
batch?
we'll take out 2 buckets at a time, and it'll be like 100.
All right. So what I would do is I would divide all 100 and then go back to the first one and give them a pre-shape. It could easily take 15 minutes to pre-shape 100 dough balls. Right? It could also take less depending on how fast you are and the spacing. And then after that pre-shape, continue your bench rest, but not for too long, and see if you get a little more structure from that. Right. Also, maybe a shorter bench rest, not a longer bench rest, if you're not doing a pre-shape, would be better for structure.
Okay, cool.
So these are all things to look at. So we've been working together virtually for a while now, and I know that you're trying to get everything dialed in. So I appreciate your vision and your tenacity, and I also appreciate you staying up pretty late in Massachusetts to Zoom with us.
No, yeah, of course. Gotta
These are
learn.
these are great questions. Will you do me a favor? Will you put a link to your pizzeria in the chat in case anybody wants to follow you?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you. What's it called?
Joni's Pizza.
Joni's Pizza. And correct me if I'm wrong. You got a review a few months ago, and now a lot of people are finding out about you, right?
Yeah, we even ended up on the Washington Post this week.
Are you kidding?
Yeah,
What
well,
did
they
the
made like a big list.
What was the list?
It was like they had every single state in America, and they said like the best pizzas
Wow.
in the state, and we got number 2 for New York, so that was cool.
For New York or for Massachusetts?
Well, for New York style in Massachusetts.
Ah, got it. Awesome. Well, if you have a chance, put that in the chat as well, and so people can look at it. That's very impressive. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
So do me a favor. Dennis is asking, what is pre-shaping? Which is a good question. Is that something you feel like you can answer?
Yeah, no,
Give us your best shot. Give it your best shot.
all right. So pre-shaping is so you scale the dough. So scaling the dough is when you cut it and you weigh it out, and then you have like this blob of dough. And so once you have this blob of dough, you actually do like a couple little folds to get the balling started, to like help make some more strength and structure. That's what I got.
There you go. That works for me too. Great. Good answer. So Dennis, thanks for that question. Let's see here. I've got some great books. One of my favorites is called Advanced Bread and Pastry. There's also a really good book just called Bread, and it's by the former head baker of King Arthur Flour. Peter Reinhardt also has a bunch of artisan baking books, Dennis. So I would say that if you're old school and you still like reading books, Advanced Bread and Pastry, Bread, and really any of the kind of artisan old school baking books by people like Peter Reinhardt will take you through the steps of baking. And pre-shaping is just one of those steps that bread bakers use and some pizza makers use. And it just gives you another tool in your tool belt to add structure or to just control the level of gluten development that you get in your process. So excellent question. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to hit me up in the chat, or you can send me a follow-up email and I'll point you in the right direction of some of those books. Also, Justin's gonna edit this YouTube or this video down from a Zoom video and post it on YouTube. So I'll take some of these links and put them in the comments. Sorry, and put them in the description of the video for those of you who are watching later. All right, beautiful. Anything else from you, Daniel?
Oh no, I just put the link in. I think it works. Hopefully, Ezra, you can see it.
Person. And he's asking, what's the name again?
It's called Joni's Pizza.
And who's Joni?
Joni's my daughter. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Does she know
Family
she's
business.
famous?
She does. She's a little embarrassed. She's in first grade, so it's a little embarrassing for her, but
Awesome. And do you have the link to the Washington Post article, or should we dig it up?
No, I don't. It's just it's not really like an article. It's just like a list of all the.
A list is awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's so
it's
cool. Is it up on your wall yet?
No, I'm just like always working, so I didn't even put my Globe article up.
Oh my God.
I know.
All right.
Yeah,
Maybe your daughter, if she's in first grade, is she any good with glue and tape?
Yeah, no, she is. I'll get her on that.
Get her on that. Very good. All right. Thanks as always for your awesome questions. Keep up the good work and keep me posted on your progresses, right? Thank you, sir. All right, everybody. We are looking at 6:07 Pacific Standard Time. I don't see any more hands raised. Plus, we are about up to the end of our Zoom. So I want to thank you all for coming by. I try to end these things more or less on time. But if anybody wants to stick around once I stop the recording for a quick chat, I don't mind answering a few last-minute questions or talking to you guys. So I want to say thank you to all for joining us. It's always fun. I'm glad that I started these things up again. We'll be back in 2 weeks doing another Monday office hours from 5 to 6 p.m. And next week, we'll be doing Science of Sourdough Zoom at the same time. So feel free to sign up for that. And Cameron Martino will be talking about really kind of a deep dive into the microbiology of sourdough for pizza and bread bakers. And then 2 weeks after that, Stephanie Swan from Modernist will be taking us through the history of sourdough. So I'm excited to be doing these Monday classes again. And thank you to you all for hanging out with us. And hope you guys enjoy your holiday weekend and get some rest and have a beer or two and be safe. I'm going to stop the recording now. And if anybody wants to stick around and chat a little bit, I'll be here for about 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Good night.